Hello, Social 20 students. This is the Chapter 8 lesson on self determination. We have talked about self determination from time to time throughout the semester, but basically, self determination is the ability to take care of yourself, determine your own so called destiny, etc. So, once again, what is it? People are trying to gain or keep power to control their own affairs. Very similar to the term sovereignty. They want to make their own decisions about what is in their national interests. So, national self determination case studies that we'll be looking at in this chapter include Timor Leste, Vietnam, Cambodia, India, Pakistan, Kashmir, and Tibet. Now, a couple of them we've already looked at some length earlier this semester, and so we're not going to go over them again. All right, so let's look at this first case study, and that is Timor Leste, also known as East Timor, was a colony of Portugal. Okay, so when the Portuguese left in 1975, Indonesia, right here, invaded Timor Leste. The UN demanded the invaders leave. They didn't, yet the UN did nothing to force them. So for years, the people of Timor Leste struggled to gain self determination. Over many years, 200,000 Timorese had been killed and the country was left in ruins. In August of 1999, the UN held a plebiscite, which is a non binding vote, which is the opposite of a referendum, which is binding in Timor Leste. Question was, do you want to complete independent, or so do you want complete independence or to remain part of Indonesia? Most people in that plebiscite chose independence, but a violent minority were violently opposed. In 2002, Timor Leste officially gained independence and a UN mission was sent to keep the peace, hence the peacekeepers. That mission ended in 2005, but in 2006, the mission reopened because of violence. All right, this is a video you could watch that would deal with the history behind the movement of independence in East Timor. But like I said, you'd have to watch that on the Google slide presentation. All right, next case study.
After nearly
So let's go back to that term self-determination. Remember in chapter 5 we looked at President Wilson. We looked at the 14 points and we looked at World War 1 and we looked at how he was an idealist. At the time he called for free self-determination of nations in Northern Europe. I guess he didn't mean nations that were in Asia, Asian nations that were in Africa, etc. Self determination can unite or drive people apart. The violence in Timor Leste after a plebiscite was caused by conflicting ideas of self determination. So, some people, a lot of people in Timor Leste wanted self determination, wanted independence. However, like I said, a minority group of people within that country did not want self determination. They wanted to be tied to Indonesia. And usually, the group that is most vocal, the group that is most organized, the group that is willing to do whatever is necessary in order to gain power are usually the ones that win out. I mean, I think of the case study of the Bolsheviks in 1917. They were certainly not the majority in Russia, but they were violent. They were willing to do whatever was necessary. They were extremely organized, and they were very ideological. Getting back to the lesson. The UN Charter states that who has the right to self determination and what this right means. But the Charter does not say what happens when a country within sovereign countries wants self determination. Usually, the UN stays out of internal squabbles, internal issues, etc. That's one of the reasons why they never went into Rwanda back in 1994. They saw it as an internal issue. Well, an internal issue that caused the deaths of 800,000 Tutsis. So another case study we've looked at is Kosovo, and I'm not going to spend too much time with Kosovo. We looked at that in I believe, the 1C assignment. Until Kosovo declared independence in 2008, it had been a province of Serbia. Many Albanians welcomed independence, but many Serbians did not. An independent Kosovo threatened Serbian sovereignty. All right, there are four different types of self determination. There's one, political self determination. I think that's the one that we're most familiar with. Okay, politically having your own government. There's cultural self determination, which you're allowed to practice your culture without fear of someone coming after you. You have economic self determination, which what happens when you become an adult, at least you hope to be economically self determined from your parents. And then you might have social self determination. So, for example, political self determination. What do people want to control? Government's actions, control over territory, photos, conflicting interests, etc. I'm just going to skip over this because I'm just going to get to the meat and potatoes of this lesson. All right, so there's another case study about self determination. This time, I need you to focus on this one because this is Vietnam. Okay. Many movies have been made about Vietnam, ranging from Born on the 4th of July, um, Good Morning Vietnam, and my favorite, Platoon. By the early 1900s, much of Southeast Asia was ruled by European countries. France controlled Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia and renamed the region French Indochina. This was all part of their imperialism that they had controlled Southeast Asia for a couple hundred years leading up until the end of World War II. So, speaking of World War II, Japan invades Indochina, part of their greater East Asia co prosperity sphere. They invade Indochina during World War II. Some people at that time now want to pursue their sovereignty, their self determination. For example, in Vietnam, a guy by the name of Ho Chi Minh, who was a communist or a socialist, founded the so called Viet Minh, the independence movement to fight the Japanese. When World War II ended, France wanted to take back control of Vietnam, but Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh kept fighting for independence. They were thinking, well, for one, this isn't your country anymore. You just got totally destroyed during World War II, and now after the war is over, you want it back. Well, no, we ain't going to stand for it. Here's a couple pictures of Ho Chi Minh. On the left, you have a cover of Time magazine, and then on the right is his dates when he was born and when he died. The war between the Vietnamese and the French finally ended in 1954 with the defeat of the French. Vietnam was divided into Communist North, supported by China and the Soviet Union, and the Democratic South, well, Democratic in name only. They were basically a dictatorship, but we'll just call it a democracy, supported by the United States. So, just to kind of make a long story short, the Americans, after the defeat of the French, decided to come in and halt the spread of communism because they were practicing a foreign policy at that time called containment. They did not want Ho Chi Minh and his communists spreading their ideals south into South Vietnam, and preferably the Americans wanted to get rid all of the communists, even in North Vietnam. So by 1969, 500,000 US troops were fighting not only North Vietnam, but also people within Cambodia. The American national interest at that time was to stop the spread of communism. They believed in something called the domino theory, that if communism was allowed to exist in China, its ideals would spread to uh, North Vietnam, and then those ideals would spread to South Vietnam, and then those ideals would spread to Laos, and then Cambodia, and then basically all of Southeast Asia, and then tomorrow is going to be the bloody world. And so they were going to use troops to go in there to stop that from occurring. Anyways, there are videos that you could watch that deal with the Vietnam conflict. This is the shortest of the three. It's about 4 minutes long. Second one has this age restriction on it. So, viewer beware, there's probably some grisly footage on there about death and stuff like that you might not want to watch, but I'm just going to skip. And then the third one, oh, let's go back. And then the third one is actually a little bit longer, about 25 minutes in length, but once again, a pretty good video that I am not going to show in this presentation. All right, moving on to the next case study. You now have Cambodia. Okay, Cambodia is a country to the west of Vietnam. In 1976, the communist leader Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. Now, they were a certain special type of communist. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time explaining it, but they were completely violent, completely ideological in trying to reshape how Cambodia was run. The leader, Pol Pot, and his group called the Khmer Rouge controlled the country. For years, people were brutalized by them. They had to give up their religion, their private property, money, and basically their lives. Over 1.5 million of them were starved and murdered and died under the control of Pol Pot and his Khmer Rouge. Eventually, the Vietnamese forces, which were also communist, overthrew Pol Pot in 1979. Here's the irony of it: Pol Pot was so communist, he even disgusted the communists in Vietnam. Okay. Eventually, Cambodia became a constitutional monarchy, but was still very unstable. By 1993, Cambodians voted in UN supervised elections, but peace was not achieved until 1998. This is a very harrowing video about the Khmer Rouge and Cambodia. I really suggest you watch it. So, one of the consequences of self determination is that if a country, say France, has been in this area for generation after generation after generation, they completely change the structure of the social, economic, political makeup. Once they leave, it creates a vacuum, a power vacuum. And sometimes what comes in that so called power vacuum is not very nice. And the Khmer Rouge, in my humble opinion, falls under the not very nice group of people. I mean, for example, and like so you could see this all in the videos. The Khmer Rouge would go into villages and they would look at people that wore glasses, and they would take the people that would wear glasses and take them out and kill them instantly because glasses represented education. They would ask people who could speak French. The people that answered that could speak French or could read, they would have them killed. See, their thinking was if you were and your mind was educated or it has any kind of Western influence on it, they believed that those minds were spoiled and they just needed to gotten rid of, and so those people were killed right away. They wanted a culture of very simplistic, simple thinking individuals that they could mold from basically a start, a so-called tabula rasa, in the words of John Locke. So there's other case studies. We learned about India in Social 10, so I'm not going to spend too much time on India and Pakistan. At the beginning of the 20th century, Britain ruled over India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. At the time, it was called Ceylon. Britain had trading rights through their East Indian Company over India, much like British had the Hudson Bay Company in Canada. In 1858, the British had direct control over India because of events like the Sepoy Mutiny, and they did not consult the people. Indian national interests were not considered. So by the 20th century, Indian nationalist movements gained strength, wanted the right to control themselves. The British allowed them a parliament with very little power, kind of like the Duma in Russia prior to the revolution. By the 1920s, Mohandas K. Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, okay, a lawyer, began to emerge as the leader of the self-determination sovereignty movement in India. Here's a little couple of quotes by Mahatma Gandhi. And like I said, we looked at Gandhi in Social 10-1, Social 10-2, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but India is another example of a country that wanted to have self-determination from England. Pakistan, another case study. Mohandas Gandhi wanted Muslims and Hindus to live together in one country. However, the leader of the Muslim League, Muhammad al Jinnah, wanted Muslims to have their own country. Eventually, Ali's ideas prevailed. So when independence occurred in the late 1940s, India and Pakistan became their own countries, their own entities. I just had to do that for a second because I like that song called Kashmir by Zeppelin. But I digress. More than likely, I'll get demonetized now. Oh, no money. Pause. It won't pause. Oh, oh, let the sun. Okay, we're just going to move on. Kashmiri people lived in a clearly defined territory in the northwest Himalaya mountains. They spoke Kashmiri, a distinct language, and were a distinct cultural group. In 1947, British and Indian Pakistan leaders decided that Kashmiris should have the right to decide whether to join India or Pakistan. The UN held a plebiscite, once again, my favorite word for the day, a non binding vote. But before this occurred, India invaded and took control of the Kashmir territory. Kashmiri people have never been allowed to vote on their future. They have resisted Indian control, and this has often led to violence. Today, maybe not yesterday, but as of a few years ago, many Kashmiri people want complete independence, not to join India or Pakistan. Many Kashmiri people have disappeared in India occupied Kashmir. Self determination Tibet. We already looked at Tibet back in it was assignment 1C. In 2008, China, Beijing hosted the Summer Olympics. Tibet took the opportunity to publicize their demands for national self determination. The autonomous region of Tibet is a province of China. Tibetans had their own culture, language, traditions, and religion. All right, I'm just going to skip this because we did this already. You can read it if you want. You can pause it and read it, or you can just fast forward, which I am doing right now. Once again, we did this in 1C. So this is review. All right, there's also self-determination of Canada. We covered this in student booklet 2D, so I'm not going to cover this in the lesson, but I will quickly go through the slides just to give you a look at it. Ding ding, 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 ding ding. All right, so what are the results of pursuing national self-determination? One, often people lose their homes, personal security, economic prosperity, and if they leave their homeland, they lose their heritage. And as you can see, they live in shambles. These are like tent cities, but worse than tent cities. They're like bed sheet cities. Not good. For example, in 2006, nearly 32 million people around the world were living as refugees. What is a refugee, you might ask? Well, I'm going to tell you. A refugee is someone who is forced to leave their home to seek safety because of war, natural disaster, or persecution. We learned about refugees back in grade 9 in chapter 5, the immigration chapter. All right, here's a video from a TED Talk or TED Ed. What does it mean to be a refugee? All right. What is a host country? Host countries are the countries that take in refugees. Canada, for example, is a host country. By the way, I'm watching my basset hound chase her tail right now for the last 10 seconds. Quite hilarious. Probably more entertaining than this lesson. The sudden arrival of a flood of refugees can strain the resources of a host country and often cause resentment. So, over the last generation or number of years, we've had tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of refugees coming into Canada. And, when the economy is doing really well, um, it's a boon for our country, etc. But when our economy is not doing well, it does put a strain on our money and our finances, etc. And there are a lot of people that would disagree with it. All right, so organizations like the United Nations and non-governmental organizations like Amnesty International, etc., try to assist. Some Afghan refugees, for example, have been in Pakistani refugee camps since 1975, 79. And if you know anything about years, that's a long time. Refugees were fleeing conflicts in many areas. Host countries were also trying to send many refugees away. Let's have a look at this cartoon. Basically, it looks like a collision course. All right. So, as you can see, complete your Chapter 8 assignment over the next few days. That's me from this morning pointing and saying, "Get your assignments done." All right, there's my dog in the background barking, chasing her tail. Like I said, more entertaining than this lesson. But you know what? I think I'm out of here. So get that Chapter 8 assignment done, hand it in, etc. And like I said, hasta la vista.